看哦。
就这个电影刚开始看不好看，后来越看越好看。
是蛮有意思的哈，而且他们两个真的演得非常好。
演好。
我想要明年要出去旅行了。
哦，准备开始啦。
一想到要旅行，越来越兴奋。想要去
飞啦。
要去很多地方。
哇，
就你已经有 plan 去哪些地方了吗？
我才刚刚定一个，就是要去古巴。是2月4号。
古巴是大概多久？他那个 trip
大概是我忘记了，他大概叫9天吧，可是头一天跟最后一天都没有活动就是了。
是从你们西岸飞，还是要先到迈阿密？
都不是，就是要大家直接飞到古巴去。
好吧，那我就从西雅图就可以过去了。
不可以。我坐 United Airline 的话，就只有纽约市跟Houston， 那别的都是要到这2个地方去转。因为 United 没有 Miami， 可是 American Airline 就有 Miami。OK，United
没有 OK。
我也不懂为什么而且很贵，就是从 from Seattle to Cuba， 那个 cost is the same as from Miami to Cuba。好奇怪哈。Anyway, let's start today here. And nowadays, I don't need to give you a link. I just tell you the name of the movie. You more or less can find it. The YouTube thing is a little different now from, let's say, a month or two before. But now I'm getting used to this. And the thing that popped up that I really was looking for does not come in as one of those on the side, but it's in lines like this. So you just have to get used to it. It's different from before. And this is a very, very famous movie, and it was done very well and very well received, and got lots of awards. And even now, after, say, 50, 60, 70 years, it's still, when you watch it, you don't feel it's too dated. Yeah, some of the movies, you watch it and you say, oh, the photography is not good or the acting is not good. It's so old. But this movie is as good as new. It's really, 我们叫做经得起时间的考验。Okay. And it's got so many good people in this movie, and each one has a very long career and lots of story to learn. We can talk about them for days, actually. This is originally a novel by C.S. Forester. It was published in 1935 it was after the end of the First World War, which is important. Things like the First World War impact people's mind very much. And we're going to talk about how this novelist made this arrangement in the story that, well, it's a direct story about the war. So, but now when we look at it, it's not about the First World War, even though the writer only had the First World War in his mind, because in 1935, there was no Second World War. But the movie was made after the Second World War, which ended in 1945, and the movie was made in 1951. And the memory of that Second World War, which was never in that book, really affected lots of people when they made this movie. And they made lots of changes to the story because their minds were influenced by the Second World War. And there are two big stars in this movie. At that time, they were only half as big as they later became. But you can see the power of their acting. They are really, really good in this movie. And one of them is Humphrey Bogart, and the other is Katharine Hepburn. And this story was made again into a TV movie in 1977. It was by Warren Oates and Mariette Hartley, playing the roles that Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn played. But they were both very good actors, and they did well according to the review. They put in lots of efforts, and they did their acting very well. However, there's just no comparison. People who watched the first one would never look again at any other thing that's done by a little lesser people. So it was probably laughed at by many people. I've never seen that, so I can't say. But these two people, I know them well, but they were in no way can be compared to Bogart and Hepburn. First, we talk about the novelist. He's an English novelist. His name is C.S. Forester. And these people we talk about today, they all have fairly long lives. This one is not particularly very long, but 67 is okay. And I believe he was in the British Navy for a while, so he knew a lot about ships and warships, how to navigate, and the history, the wars, battles on the sea, and so on. Lots of stories like that. And he specializes in novels that dealt with naval battles, from the Napoleon War to the First World War, and so on. And he was quite famous for doing that. So here we have a picture. You could not tell. It's the man is supposed to be Gregory Peck, but I don't think it looks like him at all. So C.S. Forester, he wrote 12 books on this person that we see in this poster, and his name is Horatio Hornblower. It's a fictitious captain in the British Navy, and there are 12 stories about him, how good he was, and what a wonderful person, and so on. I've seen Gregory Peck in this movie. It's called Captain Horatio Hornblower. Hornblower means a person who blows the horn. but that's his last name. And this movie was made from 2 of the 12 novels that Forrester wrote. Of course, it involves lots of battles on the sea. And at that time, the ships look like those in the background of this poster. They have big sails and, they are much older than what we're used to see nowadays. So that captain lived during the days of Napoleon's war. Napoleon 就是我们说拿破仑哈. So when you say the war that was waged by Napoleon, it becomes Napoleonic Wars. And the years were 1803 to 1815. Because in the beginning there was a French Revolution, and out of that revolution came a dictator whose name is Napoleon, one of the greatest people in history anywhere in the world. And he had the great success militarily, and he started to think of himself as a dictator, and the republic was gone because the revolution, French Revolution, was to bring the republic into France. However, because of the success of this one, we call him the corporal. He was a little soldier, and 我们叫他武长哈，就是他带了一小队兵，所以他是一个corporal 哈。Let me see. People who do not respect him, corporal. People who despise him would always call him as a little corporal, but he, of course, later on became a general and became a very successful military man who conquered almost the entire Europe in a very short 10 years. But in the end, he was defeated by what's his name? I forgot. Anyway, his statue.
Nelson?
Nelson was on the sea. Huh? So he was, Napoleon was defeated by the British army on the land in, what's that bridge?
Waterloo?
Waterloo, yes. I was going to say Waterloo, yes. So on the land, he was defeated at Waterloo in Belgium by that person from Ireland, but he eventually became a British general with his statue in Hyde Park. I will come up with that name someday. It's just on the tip of my tongue. But on the sea, Napoleon was defeated by Nelson, Lord Nelson, yes. But Nelson died in the year 1805 in a naval battle, but he inflicted mortal wound on Napoleon's navy. So this C.S. Forrester, he loved to talk about that time, which is not his time. He's like 100 years later. Well, more than 100 years later. So he wrote 12 novels about Captain Horatio Hornblower. Horatio is a first name, and nowadays you hardly see anybody with that first name, but for a while that name was quite common. There was a famous Roman writer called Horatio, and there's a famous friend of Hamlet in Shakespeare's Hamlet called Horatio. But I've never met anybody who is really called Horatio nowadays. So he wrote 12 such novels, but that's not all. He also wrote novels about ships in the First World War, like the Caine Mutiny. We'll talk about that later. But this is one of the stories with a tiny ship. Okay, he's talking about the African Queen, which is a very small boat that runs on the rivers and in the lake in the middle of Africa. And as it turns out, Humphrey Bogart was playing a captain of this boat, which has no other people on it. He has no hired hand on it. He's a captain, and it's just him doing everything on the boat. And it's called the African Queen. And this is a small boat that delivers supplies and the mail to small towns up and down the river in Africa. And according to this story, it's supposed to have happened in Eastern Africa. It's German Eastern Africa. So it was a German colony when the story started. And a few minutes after it started, German declared war. So all these British missionaries who went to preach Christianity in Africa were caught off guard when the war started, because they were British citizens, but now the German people came and burned the villages and so on. It all happened very quickly at the beginning of the movie. So he wrote this story, and it was a novel, and then it was turned into the John Huston movie in 1951. And he also wrote another book called The Good Shepherd. It's about a Navy ship at the beginning of this Second World War. Now, he wrote this after the Second World War in 1955, and the story was about 1942, after U.S. declared a war on Germany, and there was a United States naval ship, I guess it's called the Greyhound. The captain was played by Tom Hanks, and he conducted a convoy. He was a big U.S. naval ship helping lots of other ships, whether it's commercial or military, a long line of a group of many ships. Then Tom Hanks was the captain, guarding them, taking them across the Atlantic, because the submarines of Germany were hitting on all sorts of ships, including civilian ships. So this was a story written in 1955, but it was not turned into a movie until 2020, which is 2 years ago. And it seems to did well, and they're planning to do a sequel of that movie. But I haven't heard of it, so I haven't seen that movie. But Tom Hanks is pretty famous, and here's the poster for that movie called The Greyhound. And of course, movies that came out in the past 2 years all suffered somewhat because of the pandemic. Many movie theaters were closed, and they could only release the films by streaming online. Now we're sort of back to normal, but I haven't been to any theater for 3 years or 4 years or whatever. But this is a newer movie. Tom Hanks, you are probably familiar with him. He's currently getting older and not as handsome as he used to be, but he had a series of good hits, and he was always playing a heroic or kind, wonderful person. This story follows a commander in the U.S. Navy on his assignment commanding a multinational escort destroyer. A destroyer is a kind of warship in the Navy, and we call it 驱逐舰. It's of a pretty good size. And Tom Hanks is a commander of a ship that of 4 ships, actually, a group of 4 ships he commanded to defend an Allied convoy. A convoy is usually a series of ships. Sometimes it can also be a series of, say, trucks or buses on land, but most often it is about a group of ships that's line up, being protected by the leader, probably on both ends or both also on the side. So there are 4 ships, naval ships, surrounding a group of many ships in this convoy. And this group consists of 37 merchant and troop ships. So they could be civilian ships and they could be warships. So there's a group of 37 ships were guarded, protected by these naval destroyers across the Atlantic, I assume. So that's what the story was about. So this tells us that Forrester, as a novelist, he wrote a lot of stories about Napoleonic Wars. And then afterwards, he wrote, as I mentioned, but did not discuss in detail, he wrote about First World War naval ships, as in Caine Mutiny. And then from this one, we know that he also wrote about ships, warships during the Second World War. So throughout his lifetime, he was writing about ships on the sea, of course, fighting in different wars. So we put him aside and we look at this movie, which was done in 1951. It's a British-American movie. So it's got lots of people in America, all the people we know so far, including John Huston and Bogart and Catherine Hepburn, they're all from the American side. So where does the British part come in? It is other important people like the screenwriters, a photographer, and a lot, you may say half of the scenes were filmed in around London, but the other half was on location in Africa, which is a very rare thing at that time. That's 70 years ago. Movies were most of the time filmed on the lot in the movie studio in big cities. But this is one of the very early ones that was filmed half of the time on location. This word is called on location, 就是到一些其他的地方, especially where the story took place. We call that on location. The film was directed by John Huston and produced by Sam Spiegel and John Wolfe. John Wolfe is also an important person, but I did not plan on talking about him. He and his brother, of all things, they run a studio called the Romulus Studio because they are 2 brothers. Last time I talked to you about the birth of the city of Rome, or the republic, or the kingdom of Roman kingdom. It was in the beginning, there was a couple of twins, Romulus and Remus. So this guy, John Wolfe, his last name, you can say it is like a wolf. So he and his brother started a movie studio called Romulus because of that. And the other very important two people in the movie are Humphrey Bogart, who won an Academy Award for this. Even though he's a really, really big star and getting bigger and bigger later, he only won once the Academy Award for Best Actor, and it was in this movie. And once you know that, then you start to watch the movie, you could really appreciate he really did an excellent job. On the other hand, Katharine Hepburn, who was also nominated, and she did a fine job as well, but she did not win. She won Oscar many, many times, more than anyone you can see here. But she did not win the award for this movie. She was one of the, I think she and Meryl Streep were two of the most nominated actors and actresses for an Oscar. Okay. And can anyone please tell me a little bit about the story? As I mentioned, it was in the German colony in Eastern Africa. And Katharine Hepburn was a missionary from the British Empire at that time. There are lots of colonies controlled by the British Empire, but at the same time, of course, that's the largest in the world, and that's why they're called the sun never sets on the British Empire. And before the British Empire, the biggest colonial power was Spain, and actually the name was invented to describe Spain, that Spain used to be the power that the sun never sets on the Spanish Empire. That's how the term started. But later, Spanish, they lost a lot, and mainly because Napoleon conquered Spain, okay? So they lost all their colonies in the 1820s. But the crown was passed, the title was passed over to the British Empire as the biggest colonial power. But at the same time, there are other very significant colonial powers like France and Germany and Italy and Belgium and the Netherlands. They all have had sizable colonial territories. But eventually, of course, they were all lost, especially after the Second World War. It's just no longer fashionable to be controlling some other territory so far away where people had no say. That's just not correct. After the Second World War, almost all the colonial powers were gone. However, British hang on to many of them in name, not in power, but in name. For example, Canada, Australia, they are still part of the British Commonwealth. They call it Commonwealth. Let's come back to the story. When the movie opens, you see a brother and a sister. The sister is, of course, unmarried and played by Katharine Hepburn. They were there teaching local kids to sing we can say hymns or hymnals. We could say Okay, we could either say, okay, hymns 就是赞美歌哈 or hymnal. I don't know if there's a difference between these two words, but they both are used to mean the songs that you sing during the service, a religious service, to praise the Lord. And so at that time, Humphrey Bogart's boat just docked by the river to deliver mail, and they got their mail and their supply, and this captain of the boat says, you better watch out, the Germans are everywhere. And as soon as he left, the German arrived, and they burned the village and killed many people. And the older brother of this woman was in shock and became delirious, and he later could not function, and he died. So this woman, all by herself, with no husband and no relatives, no friends, and no white people anywhere around, was left alone. So when Humphrey Bogart's boat came back, he examined the damages in the city, not in town, and he helped Katharine Hepburn to bury the brother, and he invited the woman to go with him to get out of here because it looks too dangerous. So the story is mainly about this trip from this village to down the river to a lake where there were German fortress and the German warships circling around the lake. Okay, so as it is a unique situation that a lot of movies try to capture. That is, in usually one car, there are a couple of people, usually two, but sometimes a group of people in the car. But in this situation, it's in the boat that they continue on the trip for many days without anyone else in the story. So it's usually called a road trip movie, or in this case, it's a boat trip. So you just see the two of them. They interact with each other because they hardly knew each other. And so there are a lot of different or funny things that happens. But in this case, as soon as Katharine Hepburn's role, this woman, we would call her Rose. Her name is Rose. As soon as Rose got on the ship, she is not only dominating and order things around and tell the man to be polite to her and so on and so forth, but also, more importantly, she suggested that they should, or he should, make a torpedo in order to hit on that German naval ship on the lake to destroy that ship. So the story is about how the two of them, with that criminal boat, managed to do a torpedo to blow up that German ship. And first you had the experience of seeing how they deal with each other, because it's a very different, the climate is different, the environment is different, and they were limited on this boat. So there's you can see a lot of difficult situations, challenges to handle. And this this town, I could not find it anywhere on the map, probably because it's not a real town. But you can see that at that time, Germany occupied occupied all these areas. Actually, most of the area that Germany occupied as a colony is in Tanzania, whatever. So it's south of this line, because north of it, it's a British colony, but Germany is south of it. And eventually the movie on location shooting was done near this part. So this probably all belonged to Germany. And when you see a lake, you thought about Lake Victoria, but it's not Lake Victoria. And actually, the movie was filmed from this waterfall to Lake Albert, so it's here. And since it's called Lake Albert, you know that the British people are around because all these landmarks were named after European characters, and the Prince Albert was the consort or the husband of Queen Victoria. So you can be sure that this lake was named after Queen Victoria's husband. And so there must be lots of British people around here. However, this part in the south was occupied by Germany. Okay. Now we talk about the context of World War I story being told after World War II. I don't want you to look too much of it, so I'm going to just show you this. You know, when the First World War happened, it was very, very shocking to everybody. They did not know what happened. How come the whole world was at war? They did not want to fight their enemy, but they ended up involved in this war with two sides all ready to, the war already started, and they have no way to get out of it. And at that time, they were all civilized people, and in a very awkward situation. And when they dealt with each other, they were still very gentlemanly, which means that they were not hostile or just evil, wanting to kill the other side. It's just in a situation that they could not do anything else. So they were in this war. So they're still keeping their gentlemanly manners and the attitude. So after the war, people were very happy that it's over, but there are clearly winners and losers, and the losers lost everything, and the winners became the right guy, the good guys. But during the war, it was not so. They were just two sides fighting a war that they did not know how to deal with. So when Mr. Forrester, C.S. Forrester, wrote this story, he had the feeling, just as everyone during that time had, that they were just two different sides. They were not evil, they were not hostile, they were just on opposite sides. So he treated all the people with respect. Both sides are respectful to the other side. And you didn't see that the German people wanted to kill these missionaries. That's not what the story was about. And so in the story, you can tell the parts in the novel that's different from the film is where the difference lies. That, the British side, which means Humphrey Bogart and Catherine Hepburn, they were not so hostile to the German people in the novel, but they become much more hostile in the movie. And the German people also treated them more poorly, quickly sentenced them to execution, to death. But in the novel, no, they did not do such thing. It was quite friendly. So this is these are the things that are different when you make stories into movies, and things do change in history. Okay, so on this slide, I had these highlighted parts. People during the First World War, they felt it was a big mistake that could have been avoided. So they are on two different sides, but both sides are noble and chivalrous, and they behaved honorably. That's what you could see from the novel, but not in the movie. And the novel thinks that the war is a tragedy, that people had to kill each other, but not because they hate each other. However, after the Second World War, American side really portrayed this war as the war of justice and greatness, and they were the best generation, and they were the good guys, and the other side is the bad guys. So in this movie, you could see that they do treat the German side as villainous, and they consider them as the crusaders. Okay. And about this ship also, in the original movie, this German ship was sunken by the British gunboat. However, in the movie, it says this their crummy little African Queen boat accidentally hit the German ship and blew it up. Not because they were successful, but because their boat was overturned and lying there, and the German boat just happened to hit on the torpedo. And this German Navy ship is called the Königin Louise. In it, we heard English words saying this ship is called the Louisa, but in German it's Louise, so it's the same ship, of course. And this princess or emperor, or how do you call this? Well, how do you call a queen? Okay, a queen. Okay, it's Queen Louise. Okay, right here we should call it Queen Louise. However, her husband actually later became the emperor. If you look at the German history, there was no Germany. There were just hundreds of small states in Germany, and they were bigger ones, they were smaller ones, and the bigger ones, like Prussia, we call it Pulushi. Prussia became much bigger before the First World War, and so it's got more land and more subordinating states around it. And this king later declared himself the emperor German of Prussia, emperor of Prussia. Okay, 普鲁士的皇帝哈 is the husband of Queen Louise, and that's the name of this boat. And let's talk about John Huston. who's an American film director, and he was a giant in his field. He was director, screenwriter, actor, and a visual artist, which means he's a painter. And he's known mainly as a director, and he made some extraordinary movies. And many of his movies, he was the single screenwriter, or he co-writes with someone else. So he had a hand in writing almost all of his movies. And he also appeared in some of the movies, not very often, but he did. However, he came from an actor's family. His father, Walter Huston, is a very respected actor and appeared in more than one of his movies, and actually won an Oscar for one of the movies he appeared in while being directed by his son. And John Huston also has a daughter called Angelina Huston, and she became an actress as well. And she was also directed by at least twice by her father. And she also won an Oscar for a role she played while being directed by her father. So it's a family of movie people. At least 3 of them won Oscars. And most famous was this one, John Huston. And he is the director of this movie, The African Queen. Here we say he wrote a lot of screenplays, most of the 37 feature films. Feature means drama length. We say a movie is feature length, which means it's about close to 2 hours or more. That's called the feature. Feature is also used to describe things that are located on your face, such as your eye, your nose, your mouth. These are a person's features. If we say the story features Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn, that's another way to use the word feature. When we say feature film, we mean that it's not a documentary, and it's usually not a cartoon. It's a real movie of good length, not a short story. And it's a fictitious story, not a real story. Otherwise, it would be called a documentary. So this is all the traits about a movie that's called a feature film. Most of the movies we talk about are feature films because they're usually not a documentary, not a cartoon, or not a short movie, and so on. So these are called the feature films. And many of them are considered classics. He was in the business for 46 years, and he received the nomination 15 times Academy Award, which is the Oscar, winning twice. He won that twice. And he also directed both his father, Walter, and his daughter, Angelica, to Oscar wins. And we just mentioned he probably made 37 movies, and there are just too many to tell, okay? So I picked a few, which is already a lot of them, like 20 of them here. This one ought to be deleted. I was doing some work to change them. I think I decided to get this one. Okay, keep this one, okay. So even though there are almost 20 of them here, each one is a solid hit and a very, very respected. And many of them in those movies, he used the same people, like Humphrey Bogart. He started to use Humphrey Bogart in The Maltese Falcon, which was one of Bogart's very first movie, playing a private detective. And he played it so well that he became famous, and he played the same role in many movies, and many of them were directed by John Huston. I really should put that in a smaller font. Okay. Now we have the Treasure of Sierra Madre. It has Humphrey Bogart and Houston's father, Walter, in it. And Key Largo also has Humphrey Bogart, but it also has his future wife, Lauren Bacall. And they were in many movies together. I did not under Huston's direction. And the African Queen, Moulin Rouge, was very good. It's got Jose Farrell to win an Oscar for it, I think. He played a real-life French painter, Maurice Lautrec. Yeah. And Moby Dick, John Huston directed Gregory Peck in this big novel called Moby Dick, written by Melville. Herman Melville, who is a huge American novelist. And this is a kind of a funny comedy, The Barbarian and the Geisha. The Barbarian was played by, an American person in Japan, was played by John Wayne. And The Unforgiven is quite famous as a Western movie because it takes a view of an Indian person in the form of Audrey Hepburn. She really does not look like an Indian girl, but she played an Indian girl adopted by a white family with many brothers, and then she realized she was not their natural born daughter. And The Misfits is notorious for having big names in it that died later. It's got Clark Gable, who died very quickly after the movie was finished. And it has Marilyn Monroe. It was Marilyn Monroe's last movie, and she later committed suicide. And more than a few years later, Montgomery Clift also died by suicide. So that's a cursed movie. However, there were a lot of people who lived a long time after that as well, okay? But it was notorious for having such big names died very quickly. Freud is about the I don't know, it's a psychologist or a psychiatrist. They are different. Okay. Night of the Iguana has Richard Burton, and it was a play written by Tennessee Williams. And then there's a Bible. It's always a challenge to adopt the Bible to the screen. And he did a very big one with lots of cameo appearances because it covers half of the Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible. Casino Royale is a 007 movie. It's an Italian guy playing that 007 role, and he played it only once. Fat City. I think in the movie he died at the end, but of course they resurrected him to make many more 007 movies. We've got The Life and Times of Judge Roy being played by Paul Newman. And The Man Who Would Be King was supposed to be a big movie, but it didn't turn out quite that big. It had Sean Connery and Michael Caine in it. And it was meant for Clark Gable and Humphrey Bogart to play those roles, but it didn't work out. So two younger men eventually played the roles. And the book was written by Rudyard Kipling. Rudyard Kipling was a British novelist. He is still the youngest person to ever win a Nobel Prize in literature. Yeah, his books, half of his books are about British people in India. Annie is a musical comedy. Yeah, maybe some of you have seen that. It's used to be a cartoon, a Sunday cartoon, which means you have maybe 4 panels in the Sunday newspaper, but the story would continue every Sunday, and it became a novel, and it became a play, and it became a musical. Yeah, we got Albert Finney in that movie. Pretty's Honor had Angelica Houston in that movie with Jack Nicholson. It's about an Italian mafia story. However, they were probably more Irish than Italian, and the dad was adopted from James Joyce's short story, The Dubliner, with Angelica Houston in that movie as well. So he's done a lot of great things. And as a result, you can imagine he's got an ego as big as anyone. And then Clint Eastwood has a similar kind of situation, and he made a movie about John Huston, about the African Queen, and we're going to talk about that later. This is just a hint that these huge, successful movie people can have big egos, especially when he went to Africa thinking that he's the king of the world. After this, we'll talk about Humphrey Bogart. He had a relatively short life, probably 58 years, and he died of lung cancer because of smoking too much. And he is the biggest movie star ever because he was chosen to be #1 by American Film Institute as the greatest male star of classic American cinema. And he did not start as a big star. He started just playing some gangsters and hitmen and, private detective and so on. But then he became bigger and bigger and bigger. Actually, we mentioned the Petrified Forest. He was in that movie because Leslie Howard insisted that he be in that movie. Nobody wanted to hire him at that time. He had never been in a movie before. So he started not as a leading actor in the movie. He was an American film and stage actor, so he was on stage as well. Yeah, in the beginning, he and Leslie Howard were on stage on Broadway in the stage play called The Petrified Forest. That's how they got to know each other. And then Leslie Howard brought him into the movie that really gave him a start. And he is called an American cultural icon. Icon, we would translate that into 偶像. He represents so much, and people looked up to him so much that he became a cultural icon. This is about his life. You can look at his chart and know how his life evolved. He started acting and he did things on stage and then move on to Hollywood. And then he decided to stay there. And his first Hollywood movie was The Petrified Forest. And he used to play, as there are so many in Hollywood movies, gangsters and the villain roles. So he used to be playing those supporting roles because hardly any gangster or villain movie had this killer as a main character, but he played so many of them that he became bigger and bigger, and there began to be movies with him in it as the leading man. In the beginning, it was like Maltese Falcon, things like that. He was the leading man as a detective. However, later on, he became so popular that he was the leading man as a regular person, such as in Casablanca and, the Audrey Hepburn one, Sabrina. Those are regular people in American society who were not gangsters and not hitmen and not, private detectives. And there are many ways to say private detective. You can say private investigator. So it can be PI, such as a TV series called Magnum PI. So that PI means private investigator. But you can also say private eye, because it's a I. So it becomes EYE. You can also say a private detective is a private UIE-I. Okay, that I came from the initial of investigator. And there's another way to say it. It's called gumshoe. I'll put it here after Casablanca. It's called the gumshoe. Because being a detective, you usually need to run with your shoes on, or you need to walk quietly. So many private eyes or private detectives, they would wear rubber sole shoes. 就穿的是运动鞋. Gum means 橡胶. Gum shoe is an informal shoe. A decent gentleman would never wear gumshoes. So when you say gumshoe, you mean a private detective, because they usually would wear sports shoes. At that time, we don't call sports shoes. Now we call it Nike or whatever. But in the like 50 years ago, they were called gumshoes. Okay, so he was in Maltese Falcon, which was a big hit. And so he made many movies like To Have and Have Not, The Big Sleep. All those were private eye movies, and they were also called noir. We talked about noir before. Noir means a story about the darker side of the society, usually featuring a private eye who investigated people who are usually very wealthy, but there were murders, so there were bad people in those movies. And they have a certain kind of characters and storylines that it became exclusively one genre in movie. When you talk about movie, there is one kind called noir. So Humphrey Bogart, half of his movies are noir movies, but the other half are not. And when he did Casablanca, he really broke into the real world of romantic movies. Usually when you look at him, you would never imagine he was handsome enough to be a romantic lead in a movie, but Casablanca really made it for him. He became so popular, and the movie became so iconic that he forever is in people's heart as Rick. Okay. When you go to Casablanca in Morocco, you would go see the cafe, Rick's Cafe, which is, of course, not real because it's totally made up story. And a big thing in his life is his second marriage, because he, like everyone else in the movie industry, or more so in the movie industry, they got married when they were 18, 19, 20, 22, or whatever. And then pretty soon they became famous and they ditched their first spouse and they marry a glamorous partner. And in Bogart's case, he was 44 years old when he married a Bacall who was like 18 or 19. This is quite usual for a movie star. After he became a somebody, he would abandon the first marriage and the children and find a trophy wife. And this Lauren Bacall was his trophy wife. And they were in many movies together, like To Have and Have Not and The Big Sleep. They were both, two of them were the leading actors. And Key Largo, I think, yes, they did Dark Passage and Key Largo. These are more or less still private detective movies, but many of them happened in the Caribbean Sea, like Key Largo. Okay. And later he was in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Okay, this is, I really should put that on one line. Okay. And he and his wife had a movie production company called the Santana, and many of their later movies were produced by that company. And so when you look at The African Queen, which was like 70 years ago, yeah, about 70 years ago. That's a long, long time ago, but he really died quite young. So that was in his very, very late in his life. He did African Queen and the Caine Mutiny, which is about World War II, a naval ship, which is a supply ship. So it's not so glamorous as shooting down German ships or so. So all these people on this ship, the morale is very low. And actually, in the end, there was a mutiny. Mutiny is a revolt, an uprising on a ship. And the law was very clear, because when you have an uprising on the sea, there are no one else. The law has to be very strict to say that any mutiny is totally wrong, no matter what reason. So traditionally, mutiny is a terrible thing. But the morale on this ship is so low that when they were all court-martialed later, they had a good argument saying this captain is too bad. Okay, that is a story written by C.S. Forester. And it's got quite a few big names in there. Okay, so he was 44 years and he married 19-year-old Lauren Bacall, but not when they first fell in love. They made one movie and they made the second movie, and he decided to divorce the first wife and marry this new girl. Okay, in 1945, okay, that's the second movie. He divorced his third wife. Okay, so he divorced his third wife and had a really a new trophy wife. So he married 4 times. However, Bacall, this was the first marriage for Bacall. And since Humphrey Bogart died relatively young in 1957, so it's like 50, 60, a long time ago. Yeah. So Lauren Bacall had a second marriage afterwards. So they did a lot of movies together, and I might as well show you a picture of her so you know who I was talking about. And Lauren Bacall had a second marriage 4 years after Bogart died, and it was to Jason Robards, who is also a very respected actor who made lots of good movies, but not a superstar as Bogart was. He is often in a movie as an unsettled and unstable character. He played quite a few of those. He is a kind of elusive person. He could be a good person, and he could be volatile, and so he could play a lot of different roles. And he was a bad guy in Cape Mutiny because he was so bad. He treated the people on the ship so bad that they decided to revolt, to have a mutiny against him. And all those people were court-martialed later. He did very well in that movie and was nominated for another Oscar, but did not win. He won for this skipper. Skipper is the captain of a small ship, so it's called a skipper, not a captain. And here we have this word, cantankerous. It means a nasty, rude, impolite, and will always like to fight with you. So such kind of character, we call that a cantankerous person, huh? And of course, Katharine Hepburn's Rosie was a very straitjacket person, a missionary, and everything has to be fair and square. So there's a huge contract between these two people's characters, so that it creates a lot of funny situations in this movie. Well, he was in some other movies. Notably, many people have seen Sabrina, and I came across this movie recently on YouTube. So if you're interested, it's a very interesting movie to watch. And it's got 3 big stars: William Holden, Sabrina, and Humphrey Bogart. Of course, when you look at these 2 men, you would naturally think that William Holden is the handsome man who would win the heart of the girl, but it turns out to be the other way. Okay. He died of throat cancer. I'm sorry, it's a throat cancer, or how do you say it? 声带. Esophageal cancer. Vocal cord, yeah, 声带 was a vocal cord, yes. So it's somewhere of the throat, but it's the vocal cord. Thank you. Esophagus is the vocal cord, and this is the adjective that becomes the GEAL. Esophageal, I think.
Esophagus 是食道。
哦，食道的口啊，不是？哦，整条都叫 esophagus. Okay. Okay. So he is relatively a shorter-lived person among many other who lived quite long, like this one. she is over 90 years old when she died. And she was in the movies when she was 80 something. And she even won an Oscar for On Golden Pond, in which she's the mother of Jane Fonda. Her career spanned over 60 years. Here is the word span. When you look at the bridge and you look at those 桥墩子, each tower that sets down the bridge onto the two towers. And this particular section is the span. If there is no tower in between, then the bridge would span the entire river. And if there are many towers in between, then it's a more stable and reliable bridge. And the less towers you have, the more dangerous, the more engineering feat it is. Okay, this is called span. So a person's career spans over 60 years. It means from the beginning to the end, it is a long time. Okay, and she is also on stage and on television as well. And she is known for her headstrong independence, spirited personality, both on the screen and off screen. She was married very early in her life and got a divorce and never married since then. She had affairs and so on and so forth, but she never wanted to be part of a marriage again. So she shows her headstrong independence. Headstrong 就是头很强的意思哈。Independence, spirited, full of spirit, which means that didn't want to listen to others. You can say that. And outspokenness, which means 想到什么就说什么. She doesn't care if you're offended or you will cry or whatever. What's on her mind, she just speak it out. Cultivating, so she managed to create this screen persona, a person's essence of this person that matched his public image. Off screen, she is like that as well. And she often play strong-willed, sophisticated women. Well, she was in serious dramas and she was in lots of comedies because she is very skillful in playing. Those comedies are usually called the screwball comedies. You see Katharine Hepburn with Cary Grant. The two of them were together in a lot of comedies and they were called the screwball comedies. It's kind of wacky. These people are not normal, not the people we usually meet. Literary drama, like Little Women, she played Jo in one of the many adaptations of Little Women. And we could also watch Little Women, 就是小妇人, huh? I recently saw a free version on YouTube, which is a Winona Ryder's version with Susan Sarandon. Of course, there's a very recent one, but it cannot be free on YouTube. It's got Timothy Chalamet and Saoirse Ronan. So, yeah, there are quite a few movies I saw recently that we decided to vote on one for our next one. You think about it. I have chosen one which is called the Hello Dolly, but you can choose Sabrina, or you can choose Little Women. Yeah, Little Women is a very nice story and adapted so many times. And she was chosen by American Film Institute as the #1, the greatest female star of classic Hollywood cinema. So you are watching this movie with two of the greatest ever in this country. That's really something to watch for. So she started, let me see, when she was born 1907. And one of her very early movies, she was the third movie. She was brought the attention of Academy Award, Morning Glory. Huh? I have not seen that one, but I've seen so many of them. Then she, with the initial success, she gradually made some movies that were sold very poorly, box office bombs. Huh? When we say bombs, that means bad. Huh? Sometimes you need others to tell you what it means, because by bomb, it can be a big bomb, a good bomb, or a bad bomb. But when you say a movie is a bomb, that means it didn't fare well at all. And on the other hand, if it's a sleeper hit, that means it surprisingly sold very well. That's a sleeper movie, huh? A sleeper hit. And this movie, Bringing Up Babies, sold very poorly, that nobody wants to hire her at all. But this movie was considered very, very good nowadays. It also has Cary Grant in it. And as always, in such screwball comedies, Katharine Hepburn plays a very wealthy family's daughter, but eccentric and strong-headed. And there is always one of her sisters who are very traditional and going by the rule, but she is a wild card in the movie. Right now, this movie is considered a great screwball comedy, but at that time, it was a bomb. And then, as we mentioned last time, she engineered her own successful comeback. She found this writer and asked this writer to write a script for her. And she found a company and sold the right of this script to this company with the condition that they need to hire her to play this role. And the movie was a great success. So she, 我们怎么说, turn her career around by her own hand because of the movie called The Philadelphia Story. And as usual, she is one of the daughters of a very wealthy family. And got lots of, nominations. And then in the 40s, he was hitched with Spencer Tracy. Then they made a series of 9 movies together, just the two of them, as a romantic comedy, because two people are very strong-headed, while the woman would not give up her domination. So the two were just fighting all the time throughout the movie, very brilliantly. The script is to be done very well with wonderful lines, wonderful situations. So they made 9 movies together in 26 years. And there were lots of rumor about their having an affair, and Spencer Tracy never divorced his wife, and Katharine Hepburn always denied that she was having an affair with Spencer Tracy. However, after Spencer Tracy died, she came forward and admitted that she was in a relationship for many years with that man. And later on, she went on stage in a Shakespeare plays that apparently is a very challenging thing to do, especially for an American actress. And also in the range of literary roles. And then she found this African Queen, this movie, which made her another very successful movie. And since then, she attached herself to this kind of role, which is the spinster, 就是一个老小姐哈。Let me write it down. I wonder if you have seen The Rainmaker. I want to write spinster. Spin is a 纺纱机 or this verb spin, meaning you're spinning the wheel to make a cotton or wool into a thread, that is to spin. So a spinster is a woman who always sit there and spin because she was never married and never had children or husband to take care of. So this word means a 老小姐, a spinster. And in this movie, she plays a spinster because she was beyond the marriageable age and was never married and was very opinionated, always would not listen to other men. So this is a typical kind of character that she excels in, playing a spinster. And people loved her in such roles. So she played this kind of roles again and again. For example, I was going to ask if you have seen that movie, which I did when I was like 12 years old. That movie with Burt Lancaster is called The Rainmaker. And Katharine Hepburn was a spinster living on the farm with some brothers, but she was never married. And along came this 油腔滑调 the Burt Lancaster, who was like a snake oil seller, selling cure-all oil medicines, and they fell in love. So in this movie, she also played a spinster, and it was very well received by the audience. Then she received 3 more Academy Awards. These are probably all supporting roles. So she did not win a lot of leading actress roles, but she won the supporting actress role 3 times in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, The Lion in Winter, and On Golden Pound. As she gets older and older, she was in these movies playing the older, opinionated, strong-headed people. However, in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, she's a mother who is very sympathetic to the daughters falling in love with a black man, while Spencer Tracy was the stubborn one who refuses to accept this black man, who was played by Sidney Poitier, of course. And The Lion in Winter, we talked about it. The lion was played by Peter O'Toole, and the lion was Henry II, King of England. Then he not only went on stage, he was in many television productions. And she last played a role when she was 87, and she died in 96. The last 10 years, she was quite sick. And she does not like the so-called celebrity. She does not go for the role that people just swoon over her. She wants to be away from the fans. and she does not want to play the role that the society expect a woman to play. She was wearing trousers when there was no one who, women don't wear trousers at that time, and speaking out her mind and not subject to the rules and the regulations. That's her, huh? She epitomized the modern woman in the 20th century United States. A lot of women like her for that. She is a trailblazer for being a modern woman. And the word epitomize means that she symbolized, she embodied the characters of a modern woman. That's what epitomize means. And so these are some of the movies. I talked about Little Women and Bringing Up Baby, Philadelphia Story, and those are five movies with stars were movies with Spencer Tracy in them. And we say that she made 9 movies during 26 years. That does not include Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. That happened much later. And in Rooster Cogburn, she was with opposite to John Wayne. And John Wayne, who's been in so many Western movies using stunt doubles, he saw Katharine Hepburn as old as he was and doing all the stunt by herself. So John Wayne had to do some stunt by himself when he was playing acting in this Rooster Cogburn. I think John Wayne got an Oscar for the prequel of Rooster Cogburn, the True Grit. True Grit was the movie. John Wayne won an Oscar. That was in 1970. Yeah, 1970. Because I remember the moment when it was announced, and my roommate in college said many bad things about John Wayne. They were the progressive Democrats, so they did not like John Wayne. And I just came to this country half a year, so all my thoughts were very, very conservative. And how I changed. Okay. I would like to say a few words about Sam Spiegel. I rarely talk about a producer, but he is an extraordinary producer and an independent one at that. Almost always a big producer like Irving Thalberg that we talked about. He died at, 29 or something. He had the huge back behind him, like MGM and Samuel Goldwyn. Those big studios are very, very big and powerful. They have so many investors in their pockets, so they can afford to do lots of big projects. But as an independent film producer, Samuel Spiegel was an extraordinary one, because most independent filmmakers, they can only produce indie movies. Independent movies are called indie movies. They are very low budget, but they want to do something different. They are not looking at the bottom line. When you say looking at the bottom line, means that you just want to make money. Bottom line. When you have a spreadsheet with two sides, expenses and income and so on, investors, and on the last line, you have the bottom line. When you look at the bottom line, you're looking at how much money you made, and you hope to see no money lost. So the big studios, they are looking at the bottom line. And for independent film producers, you usually don't have enough money or people on your hand to play with. But Sam Spiegel is an extraordinary person. He He won the Academy Award for Best Picture 3 times. If you have ever seen an Academy Award show, you know that in the beginning, they give out supporting roles, the male and the female supporting roles. Then they give out lots and lots of things in between. And toward the end, they would give the last 4 biggest awards. That is the leading man and the leading lady, the director, and the best picture, which means the producer would win the best picture award. And this means Sam Spiegel, he won best picture 3 times as an independent producer, which is, you just cannot find anybody that remotely get close to that. Okay, these are some of the movies, and if we shrink it down to some of them, you will see that he produced The African Queen, On the Waterfront, which we called 岸上风云, The Bridge on the River Kwai, 贵河大桥, Suddenly Last Summer, I forgot what it's called in Chinese, but it's got Tennessee Williams as the playwright, and Catherine Hepburn and Elizabeth Taylor and Montgomery Clift. It's about a gay man. And that's also quite a big hit. And Lawrence Arabia, of course, that's one of the biggest movies ever made. And he, Sam Spiegel, as an independent filmmaker, he could pull that off. That involves tons of money, Lawrence Arabia, and lots of talents involved in there, but he's not always very successful with the Chase, which had Marlon Brando. It was not a very successful movie, but Nicholas and Alexandra is quite well received, even though it's a Swedish movie, with Ingmar Bergman. So Nicholas and Alexandra would be a Russian story about the Tsar, the last Tsar of Russia, Russian Empire. Okay. And the Last Tycoon is the last unfinished novel of, how do you say his name? Fitzgerald, okay? Fitzgerald. What's his, well, he doesn't use his first name too much, so it's F something Fitzgerald. Anyway, he wrote this Last Tycoon with Robert De Niro.
Is it
Scott, yes. Scott Fitzgerald. We usually would say Scott Fitzgerald, but there's another letter before it. Anyway, Scott Fitzgerald, yes. And his other famous movie that was adopted more than once is The Great Gatsby. People like to make a big deal about his movies, even when the story is not very big. Actually, we talked about that already. Okay. Okay, I already talked about it. And here I was going to talk about this Queen Louise. She died very young, 25, 30, 34, I guess. But she was loved by the people. Her husband is Frederick Wilhelm II of Prussia. And she was, died young. And when I read this, I immediately remembered this picture I took in Berlin. Berlin is similar to New York City in that at the very center of the city, a big city, there is a very big park. New York City has Central Park, and Berlin has a Tiergarten. And in this Tiergarten, on the first day I arrived 2 days before the tour with Margaret, we went through this Tiergarten and I took a picture of this statue, which is the statue of Queen Louise. in Tiergarten. Yeah. And also this parakeet is a bird that is very common. As I grew up, many people had parakeets in their homes. And in this movie, The African Queen, because it's in Africa and people saw this bird in there, and then they see a lot of similar birds in London, and they had created a story which may not be true, that when they filmed this movie, they brought back a lot of birds, parakeets from Africa, or the story can be that when they release a bird into the wild, or they just kept it and it became they escaped from the movie studio. So when you see lots of parakeets in London, people say those parakeets were from the African Queen, but may not be true, because it's probably one of the most common pet bird in the world, I think, more often than any other kinds of parrots or birds. Yeah. This is another version of it, and the people did not like this 1977 version, and I have not heard about it until the last 2 weeks. And I want to talk about this one, which is quite interesting to me. I have seen this movie when it was released, probably around 1990 something. And it was directed by Clint Eastwood. It is about the making of The African Queen, with the director being John Huston and the actors being Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn. But he didn't use the real names. He used a book which was written by Viertel. Viertel is the writer who wrote this book, and he wrote the script for that movie for the original African Queen. So Eastwood decided to adopt his like a journal, a diary of this scriptwriter that recorded the happenings while they were on location in Africa. And as you can imagine, it interests Clint Eastwood very much because the huge ego John Huston had, because he was already a very famous director, and he made the studio to let him go to Africa to film this movie, and he got lots of money at his expense, and the major thing is he wanted to kill an elephant there. So the whole goal is a big hunter, a big egotistic director who's a hunter. He wanted to kill an elephant in Africa. So he made the studio to pay for the entire trip with everybody in tow in order for him to go on a safari and kill an elephant. So this is quite an ego trip for him. And at that time, Clint Eastwood is just getting to be having an ego as big as Huston. At that time, people felt that, but they did not have ample proof about it. But since that movie was made, he made many, many other movies which showed what a big ego he had. So this movie, in the beginning, people did not think too much about it. And later on, they see that this movie is actually showing you two people. It's a story of two people. One is a director, original one. One is the next director who talk about the original one, while both of them had huge egos to show off. So it's a very interesting movie about the making of another movie. with two very famous people with big egos. Okay. So it's a story about John Huston and the making of that movie. Lots of such stories, such movies, such stories ended up into on screen because the making of the certain movie is very interesting that they would make a movie to tell you about the making of that movie. I've seen quite a few like that. There was one of making La Mancha, the Man of La Mancha, which was full of accidents and the problems. The musical with Peter O'Toole, the making of La Mancha, everything that could go wrong was wrong. And the making of Apocalypse Now with Francis Ford Coppola, that was about Vietnamese movie, a movie about a Vietnamese war with Marlon Brando and Martin Sheen, adopting the story of Joseph Conrad, who wrote the original story meant for Africa. A Heart of Darkness was a novel by Joseph Conrad about an exclusive person in the heart of Africa who was originally a man of integrity, but on the road to somewhere he became so corrupted. And they remade that story and put that background with the American Vietnamese War as a background. And the making of that movie was, the script was written by the wife of that director, and she saw everything, including Martin Sheen, the main character, having a heart attack on the spot. And lots of very strange things. So telling the audience about the making of a movie is another industry, actually. I've seen so many of them. And this is about Wilson, who is actually John Huston, who is a lifelong hunter and wanted to kill an elephant. So he actually bought finely crafted hunting rifles, charged them to the studio. So he is there on location to work, but his entertainment was paid for by the studio. Okay, this person, Peter Viertel or something like that. He was English. He was a Jew from Dresden, and then he emigrated to California. And one notable thing is his second wife was Deborah Carr, which is amazing because that was an actress that I really like and enjoyed. And they were married for 47 years when she died, and he died 19 days later. So that must be a happy marriage, I suppose. But he is very respected for many things. These are the screenplays that he wrote. There's something British about him. I said he was British, but he came to California, but he probably went somewhere else later. And The Search is a very unique Western movie. When you think about American Western movies, it's a genre that's always talking about the Indians are the bad guys that are always trying to kill white people, and the white people are against all odds pushing back the Indians. But The Search is the first and only one that talked about the life of Indian people being chased after the Western people, white people. And this has little Natalie Wood as a very young child playing a white child being kidnapped by the Indian people. And John Wayne was heading a group of people being hired by her parents, trying to search for her, and eventually they found her, but she did not remember or keep any of the cultural tradition, and she thought she was an Indian person. Now this got a lot of things you can think about. It's totally unlike any of the Western movies. And coming down the line, we have the African Queen and Beat the Devil, and then The Sun Also Rises. That novel was written by Hemingway. It started with the run of the bulls in Spain. It's about, Hemingway wrote about the Second World War most of the time. He himself was in the war, and I think he was probably driving an ambulance, and lots of people in his story was like him. I mean, it's semi autobiographical. And The Sun Also Rises was played by Tyrone Power, who was once a very big star, and it has Ava Gardner as the love interest. However, Hemingway was also a journalist in Paris. So all these roles, like The Sun Also Rises, or the one in Spanish War with Gary Cooper, was For Whom the Bell Tolls, or the one Farewell to Arms. All these were semi-autobiographical for Hemingway to write about his experiences during the Second World War. And then there was The Old Man and the Sea. At that time, this book was won a Nobel Prize. Actually, the Nobel Prize is usually awarded for a group of works. A novelist has to write a lot of great novels in order for them to give you an award, a Nobel Prize. So it usually is not awarded to you for a certain novel. But at that time, Hemingway already passed his prime. And then suddenly he wrote this very old and philosophical story, and then won the Nobel Prize. So people think he won the prize for that. But he was all the rage all over the world for many, many years for many very good stories that he wrote. And of course, Peter Wilter was able to be hired to do this, to do two of the scripts of Hemingway stories. That's quite an honor. And then his diary during the filming of The African Queen was adopted by Clint Eastwood to make this last movie that he was famous for. Yeah, his diary kind of novel is sold very well for many years. It came out in the 50s, and then this movie was made much later by Clint Eastwood, probably because Clint Eastwood really feel the kindred spirit with John Huston. He could imagine a macho man like him wanting to make a film, but the whole purpose is to kill an elephant in Africa. And actually, when he finally came face to face with the elephant, he could not pull the trigger because it was so magnificent. He could not kill that. However, one of his tour guides was killed by the elephant. That's why on their way home to the hotel, they heard the local people beating the drum, and they passed their messages by beating the drum in certain ways. And the local people told Mr. Peter Wilter that the drum was saying that white hunter, black heart, because these people are white, but they have black heart. Okay, I've been talking quite a lot. So that's the last one I talk about. And people look at this movie and they think that Clint Eastwood was in the mood of being John Huston. And several of his later movies also show that. This is his word, megalomania. It's huge, crazy, huge ego. It's called the megalomania. Mania is a sickness. Mega is big. You have Clint Eastwood nowadays. He's so much older, and he was young. Before any of us had heard of him, he was in the TV series called The Rawhide, and he became quite famous in America, but few people in the world other than Americans know about him until he was hired by the Italian director to make 3 American Western movies. We would call them 荒野大镖客, 黄昏双镖客, and 黄昏三镖客. This is called the Dollars Trilogy because the first one is a fistful of dollars. The second one is for a few dollars more. So it's all about dollars. This is a gun for hire. He's not doing good things because it's good, but because people pay him to do that. That's what a 镖客 is about, a paid, hired warrior. He makes money for whoever pays him. And the third one is no longer, the title does not have the word dollar because it's already very famous. People liked it and they would go for the last episode as well. And the name is quite cute. It's called the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So there are 3 such 镖客. One is good, which is Clint Eastwood. And the bad one is probably Lee Van, I forgot his last name. And
Lee Van Cleef.
Cleef, yeah, Cleef. Okay, thank you. Lee Van Cleef, that's the bad. And the ugly is Eli Wallach. Eli Wallach was in the movie The Misfit, but he didn't die with Clark Gable or Marilyn Monroe or Montgomery Clift. He lived a long, long time. And he played the ugly. And he's a very versatile person. He could be like fatherly, funny person or evilly funny person or whatever. He was in comedies and in a lot of other, he was never the leading, he never played the leading role. For one thing, he played the father of Audrey Hepburn in How to Steal a Million, which is a terrible movie. But that was a happy father, clownish person. But in this The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, he was the evil guy. And these 3 movies are so popular worldwide that just about everybody have seen them who lived through that period of time. And even in the news, some politician would say, we're giving you everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It becomes, it went into everyday saying. People are constantly using those terms. And these are also called the spaghetti Western because they are made by Italian people. And of them, the director is, of course, the most famous. His name is Sergio Leone. But the person who did the music was also very, very famous. He died recently. I don't know, last year or some year. And I think his name is Mosconi. And his music is tremendously popular because people liked, he scored many, many more movies. He came to Hollywood and made music for many famous movies as well. But Rawhide was the television series that started the Clint Eastwood's career. And he has a very long career. He's even making movies right now, and he had the stages with different streaks. For example, he made 3 of the Western Italian spaghetti Westerns, and he made a series of 5 Dirty Harry movies, which is a San Francisco cop who is not the traditional good cop or bad cop. You can say that he does good in the bad way. That's how I can describe. For example, he would kill the villain by shooting the villain himself, but because he's doing something good, okay? Because the villain was bad. And that's a very macho thing to do. So he became such an icon of masculinity. And then he did some very successful movie with a big monkey. I don't know how you call them, maybe a chimpanzee, some kind of big ape in the movie with him. They're comedies. One is called Every Which Way But Loose, and another is called Any Which Way You Can. They are comedies about regular life with an ape. And he won the best director and the best picture for 2 movies, The Unforgiven, which has the same movie name as the one I just talked about. That's called Unforgiven, with Audrey Hepburn playing the Indian girl. But in this is also a breakthrough kind of anti-Western movie. It's about a Western movie, but it's a group of prostitutes who hired a person to kill a bad customer. So it has to be that way, that when a genre like the Western movie went on and on for so many years, it has to turn dark. And Clint Eastwood made a very drastic turn with the movie called The Unforgiven. It also has Morgan Freeman and the other, I can't remember the name. He won the Oscar for The French Connection. And then he made $1 Million Baby.
Hackman?
Pardon me?
Gene Hackman?
Gene Hackman, I think so. Yes, that is the name. Yeah. I have to take you with me everywhere. Forgetting things so much. And this $1 Million Baby has Hilary Swank, who got an Oscar for Boys Don't Cry. And this is about, is it called euthanasia? Euthanasia is about this young girl who became $1 million boxer, but then she went into a coma and could not wake up. So Clint Eastwood is good at making money, making movie, and also he's good at challenging people's thinking. He wants to do things that make people think. That is very honorable, I think, for a movie maker to not just want to make money. Movies like In the Line of Fire, it is meant to be a big seller, selling lots of tickets, or Bridges of Madison County. That's a real romantic movie, but Clint Eastwood really did something else too. Like Gran Torino is about an Asian kid befriending this Clint Eastwood character who had the terminal cancer. So he went about and revenge for this Asian kid being bullied, and in the process got killed because he knew he's going to die anyway. And the mule, he's driving trucks for the cartel people, the drug dealers hiring regular people to drive their trucks to ship illegal drug Mexico to America, and he was one. Yeah, I've seen all of these, everyone that I just mentioned, but not the last one, Cry Macho, which is very recent. Yeah, I think he is, in the beginning, he was just a macho icon, but then he branched out and did many different things. And not only was he in movies that he was the leading actor and the director, but he was also directing movies that does not have him in it, like Mystic River and the Letters from Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima is a Liu Huang Dao. Letters from Iwo Jima is about letters that soldiers during that battle wrote back to their home, either to America or to Japan. He had both sides reading real letters from those soldiers in that battle. Iwo Jima is near the end of the Second World War, and it was extremely bloody. At that time, Germany already surrendered, but Japan would not surrender. Germany surrendered on May 9th or May 10th, depending on which side of the time zone you live. But Japan did not surrender until August, probably 13th. And there were several people interested in Iwo Jima. They want to describe this thing as bloody, and these people are real people. That's why they read the letters from real soldiers. And he got nominations for those movies too. And Mystic River is probably in Boston about a clergyman molesting children. So these are all loaded topics that people did not want really to encounter and confront. And this American Sniper was a big box office movie, and it has Bradley Cooper in a very unusual role. He usually plays like a playbook, Silver Lining Playbook. Those are light comedies and or things like people making on Wall Street making money and so on. But American Sniper is really about a soldier in the military who are snipers. Snipers means you're not part of the war, but you're hiding somewhere secretly and shooting down on people, taking out people's life while other people did not know you were there. That's called a sniper. And he won tons of awards. He won 4 Academy Awards and 4 Golden Globe Awards, and 3 César Award is a film festival in Paris, and American Film Institute's Life Achievement Award. And interestingly, he won the seat of mayor. He became the mayor of Carmel by the Sea. For 2 years, he was the mayor of that pretty little town because he had a house there, but there were too many tourists. I was there last year. We went there twice, actually. It's so touristy. Everyone on the street is a tourist, I would say. And for people like him who live there regularly, he did not like it. But of course, it's arguable if he could make a difference. But he was mayor for 2 years. And here I don't want to go into detail about why Africa is called the dark continent. in this article that I read, we usually say, because people don't know much about the dark continent, it is so far removed from the Western civilization. And we also say the geography of Africa makes it hard for them to interact with others. I read one thing that says most of the African rivers cut through the mountains into the sea without any level land or farmland. So you cannot really use the navigation of the rivers and so on, and you can not easily get into the heart of it. That's why it's called Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, who is a Polish person writing novels in English. And this article that I read is that it is an evil scheme by the white Western people to paint this continent as so unknown and so ignorant and so difficult, challenging health and in terms of navigation and diseases like malaria and yellow fever and all sorts of things. It makes the continent very backward, and as a result, the only salvation is for us white people to go in there and take it over and put them in slavery and save them. This is a dark scheme by the white people to call it the dark continent, because this continent had 2,000-3,000 years of culture, and it has always been communicating with the outside world. They had empires now and then with great science and literature, and they could do a lot of things that the Western people just want to erase from history. They tell people, they throw away everything that Africa had and tell people that this is an ignorant and a dangerous place, and only we can save them by making them our slaves. He could be right, he couldn't be wrong, but that's his way of explaining why it's called a dark continent. There are a lot of things that Western white people tell us about the Black people that are wrong. For example, they are collectively ignorant, uneducatable, and sloppy and lazy and so on. These are excuses that they create to make them slaves. On the other hand, when the Western people came to China, they could not do such a thing. They could not say, oh, it's a dark country. They knew nothing. They're sloppy, they are lazy, and so on and so forth. No, they cannot do such a thing. But everything they knew about Africa in the past, they just put it away and say that there is nothing there. They banned those books, according to this person. And they categorically say they can only be our slaves. They are good for nothing. Okay. I also saw a Peter O'Toole movie on YouTube recently that's free, and it's called Pygmalion. And we've seen the Leslie Howard version, and I didn't watch it, but if you want to watch, it's interesting. And the Eliza role was played by Margot Kidder, I think that's her name. She was Lois Lane in the first Superman movie, the first 1 or 2 or 3 Superman movie. Oh, with who was it playing Superman? Reed. Reed was his last name. Christopher Reed.
Christopher Reed.
Okay. Yeah. This Eliza was played by this Lois Lane in the Superman movie, and she was pretty good actually. I never respected her for as an actress for in being in those movies, in the Superman movies, but this one she was very good. I would say, but I only saw the beginning. Okay, and what I chose for next one, it's December 21, is Hello Dolly, unless everybody is against it. That's an interesting change because it's a musical and because it's got, you know, how do you call that woman who played the Dolly? Barbara Streisand. Yeah, Barbara Streisand was that. But it's a very big, important role on Broadway stage, played by many, many famous people before her. And she came very late. And there were like Carol Channing and I don't know who else was there. There are quite a few dollies on Broadway. They all did very well. And we'll talk about that later. So this one is a little longer, 2 hours and 28 minutes, and it's got lots of people in it, in which there was a clerk who worked at the grocery store. It's kind of an important role. And this actor later was the Phantom in the Phantom of the Opera. And throughout his life, he played the Phantom on stage for decades and decades because he is pretty good at it, I would say, but now he's too old. I can't say his name, but I will tell you his name next time. Something like, I'm not going to try. Okay. Barbara Streisand, I could try to remember because she is way too famous. Yeah. Okay. So it'll be Hello Dolly. Okay. I was thinking about other things. I was just talking out to you about booking a trip, and this would be the first trip I had for more than 3 years. And once I started to think, I come to realize there are other opportunities. So I hate to say this, but maybe I will have to cancel some classes in order to take trips, but who knows? It's still far away. I think winter is not the time to think about taking trips unless you're going to Africa or South America. Okay. Okay. Anything you want to say?
I just want to say that I saw in the 1980s during one of my trips to visit the Keys a couple of times. And one of the trips we stopped at Key Largo, and there was the African Queen there.
Oh,
And
yes, yes.
yes.
I did not mention. Yeah, they bought that ship and moved it to Key Largo. Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And it's just looking at itself as a very unassuming, very plain little.
Yes, in the movie as well. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was
little thing. And he just took a hammer and hit and could fix this and that. It's just a very ordinary boat. I wouldn't call it. But when the movie is famous, people want to attract tourists. They want to get those ships docked on there. There's a Mutiny on the Bounty, and there are copies of that ship, not the real original one. Yeah, here and there. I think when I was in London, it was docked in Greenwich Harbor. Mm-hmm. And there's another one in Sydney Harbor in Australia as well. They look very nice, much nicer than the African Queen.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But if you search on the web, you can trace what this boat was, and then it became what, and then became what. Yeah, lots of story behind them. And like that Queen Louisa, that ship it's still running as a ferry boat in Africa right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh. So must be there right after the war, the sentiment, they want to blow it up in the movie. That's it.
And they fixed it up, of course. It's so
Yeah.
old.
Yeah.
It's 100 years old at least. It's already a ship when the movie started.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, everything connected to popular movies can attract tourists. For example, you have people going to Canada, Prince Edward Island, because of Anne of Green Gables, and then you could go to see Jane Austen house or Charlotte Bronte house, and especially lots of Japanese women wanted to get married in those places.
Uh-huh.
For one thing, wedding is very expensive in Japan, so they would rather go somewhere else to do their wedding for a lower price. Yes, Hawaii is a place that's
Oh, yeah.
popular for Japanese brides.
Very, very popular. Yes. Yes.
But I always thought it's a kind of a family thing, and then you have to ship all your relatives there. That's a kind of hassle.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
So we'll see you next time.
Okay, and we'll watch Hello, Dolly to talk about it a month later. If you're kind enough to prepare something to say, for example, you can tell us about the story, or you can tell us the origin of the story, because it was originally a German play, and then it was adapted, changed into American play by Thornton Wilder, but it's still a play, but then it became a musical. That's a real American thing, but its origin was a Jew in Germany.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Or any of the characters or actors or directors or whatever. Yeah, there are a lot of things you can say something about. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.